You are live. Wow. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. A good Yom Tov. Good Yom Tov. We're finishing up of the great Yom Tovim Chav HaChagim of Yud Tes and Chav Kislev, which was yesterday and today. The release of the Alter Rebbe from prison and the beginning of the really spreading out of the well springs of Chabad Hasidus to the furthest corners of the world. And it should be ultimate his Galus Melech HaMashiach right now. L'chaim, l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah b'dvaroi. All right, let's get jamming. We are on Parshas Vayeshev. Okay. Aleph. Dubar Patnim Rabbeis Acharayna will practice man Acharayim has been expressed many times, especially of recent. Ki al pi halka hasimanim doreinohu hador acharein shel galus. Mamila hador rishon shel gula. That we are the last generation of the exile, and thus automatically the first generation of the redemption. Shahari kavar siyama. As Kohenini ha'avoda ukavar oimdim lochnim negula mitis hashlema ide Mashiach tzikenu techem liad mamish, and we have completed all of the work that is incumbent upon us, and all the ends of the ends have already been reached, and we are already standing in preparation for the true and complete redemption, which will take place through our righteous Mashiach. It should happen immediately. You see, the Rebbe has emphasized this over and over again over the last several sichas. So there are some questions. It says that the redemption is dependent upon the entire world, that it should be prepared for such an event. This shouldn't be applicable only to like one person who's ready for Mashiach, or even a group of people that are ready for Mashiach. And it's not applicable only to one portion of the world. Shall call ha'olam. But the redemption and the preparation for redemption is something that is incumbent upon the entire world. And therefore we see the redemption is connected and dependent upon all the Yidden that have spread out to the furthest corners of the world. And also the refining or rectification of the nations of the world and all of their lands. Hikan ruin sha'olim v'shoalim shinoi v'olim. So the Rebbe says, where do you see this? Where do you see the change in the world? Does it appear that currently in today's climate, the world is more prepared for the true and complete redemption than it was from previous generations? And that's a common question. Why our generation? If you look around the world, it does not really seem like we're ready or we're fitting for the redemption. It would seem the redemption should have come in previous generations when we were at a much higher level spiritually. That's the question. Base. So we can understand this, the Rebbe says, by proceeding by the general reason that the Jewish people have been spread out in the Golas in all places across the world. It's not the stum of the fact that Jews are everywhere around the world, in the furthest corners of the world. That's why there's Chabad houses everywhere around the world. And that's not just because Israelis look for places that are peaceful after the army, even though that may be part of the revealed reason. The deeper reason is that God has spread the Jewish people to the furthest corners of the world to elevate the specific areas of the world and bring holiness to those specific areas. Gam herida gadol yoiser. Hario imrim esol. Kitzadaka. Asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Prizoyin the Bein Hamons. So it says like this: the fact that God has spread, or basically, scattered the Jewish people in different countries all across the world. And it seems like a great descent. In other words, that we're not living all in the Holy Land of Israel, but instead we're in what appears to be much lower, at least in a spiritual sense, countries. But the Rebbe says this Yerida, this descent, is only bechitzonis. It's only in an external or revealed way. And in fact, we see that it's really for the purposes of a great aliyah. And it says that Hashem did a great kindness by spreading the Jewish people amongst the nations of the world. Because we know, according to a deeper meaning and a deeper reason for this phenomenon, and in fact, there's a great advantage to the Yidden in being placed in their specific service in the specific place and where they are. Asher heim shivim b'medina zera v'heim mitlabshim. Banhagi hamakayim v'hamedina. We see that when Jews settle and enter into different lands, they go according to the customs of the place of where they are. And every single place has its own special way of doing things. And therefore they must enter and go in accordance with the ways and customs of the place that are there. That doesn't mean chas v'shalom to go against the Torah or go against something connected to God. It just means your connection to God and your way of serving God is in accordance with the specific customs of the place and where you are. Kidrei Hazal, and our rabbis teach us, Azoilas, the Karasa, Haile, Minimosi, Halacha, Nifsakis. V'zei Iker, Gadol, we call Divrei Masa Matan. And we know that according to halacha, you need to go according to the customs of where you are. The Rambam speaks about this extensively. You learn the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, you'll see in many places where he references that, and you go according to the custom of the place, with weights, with measures, with ways of counting certain things. In other words, every place has a little bit different nuances as to how things go. And therefore, when the Yidden are spread out in these places, they go according to this. And the Rebbe say we see this especially in the ways of doing business, right? Anyone who's done business internationally or have entered business deals with other nations, whether that's in Asia, in Russia, there's different ways of doing things than there is here in America. And they go according to the ways, the speech, and the customs according to the place they are. And there's often great differences and according to the customs from one country to another. And according to the customs of the nations of the world. And therefore the Rebbe says, it's not just a matter of the fact that the Yidden are at different places in the world, so they conduct business in a different way, or they dress in a different fashion. Adarabba, the whole point of the Yidden going to the furthest corners of the world and on a revealed way conducting business in those places is that order that they should praise and serve Hashem according to the specific ways of the place. Because at the end of the day, it's all about revealing God and praying to Hashem and elevating Hashem in wherever you are. And therefore, there's a different way according to different customs in different nations. They have a different path, if you will, in praising and glorifying Hashem. Right? Moroccans daven differently than maybe Sephardim from Spain, from Russia. From every geographic area has specific customs, specific ways of davening, of learning. It's all about praising Hashem, but in a different, nuanced way. And therefore it says, all of your deeds shall be for the sake of heaven, and you should know God in all your ways. And therefore it's important to add on in our service of Torah and mitzvahs in a way that's apropos for the specific place in which we find ourselves. Okay. As is explained in Chassidut. That it says, according to our rabbis, that Hashem did not send us in the exile to be scattered amongst the nations. Only, it says, in order that we should have and create converts. Gemar Psachim. So what does it mean, create converts? When it's referring to creating converts, it's not necessarily speaking about converting Gentiles or Goyim into Jews. It's talking about the sparks of godly energy, the holy sparks of godliness that fell into the world. It's known, according to Kabbalah, that there's 288 sparks that fell from the world of Tohu in what was known as the Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels in the primordial world that God created before our world of Tikkun was brought into being. And those sparks of godliness have descended and are trapped and hidden within the furthest corners of the world. And when a Jew is in a specific place, by learning Torah, by doing mitzvot, by davening, we're elevating those sparks. And that's what it means that God send us to the furthest corners of the world to make converts, to elevate sparks, to convert the mundane into holy. And that's what it means. That Hashem sent the Jews into exile, into different places across the world, in order to refine, to rectify the godly sparks that are in that specific place. And therefore, it is their job to elevate these sparks that are found in that specific place. And therefore, we see how Hashem really did a tremendous kindness. He did a tzedakah, a chesed, by placing the Jewish people amongst the nations of the world. Because God sent us to these different locations in order that we should add on or take advantage of the specific place in our specific work of rectifying and refining and redeeming, if you will, or converting, if you will, these sparks of holiness that fell into that specific place and elevating them and returning them back to Kedusha, back to holiness. And for this reason, we can see why God spread the Yidden in the furthest corners of the world. As it says in the pasuk, and you will spread out to the sea, to the east, to the north, and to the west. And by going into these specific places, into these specific places across the world, the Jewish people are enclothing their innermost being into the specific customs of that Medina, of that country. And conducting themselves, of course, in a permissible way, all according to the, I hope your tire is filled with air again. And conducting themselves in, of course, a permissible way. In other words, you have to state, of course, according to halacha, according to Torah mitzvot. But nevertheless, you then must conduct yourself in accordance with the custom of the place where you find yourself. We call the Hudi the Pa'al as a Biwar Bazukach. Bakal Makrim and Makrim the Fi and Inehu. With Surah Kazais, Niflois, Diralois Rekmataktai. By elevating those godly sparks that get trapped in that specific place, we're literally creating a dir patachtonim, a dwelling place for Hashem. Tachtonim lashim rabbi, meaning in the plural sense. Ka tachtonim begidreu, because the entire lower worlds, kasher nimseim b'makom hahu ba'ifan ari, o mamashpiim shema makom achar, lo mitzlichim. The fual as va'isa ba'ifan kafi shenaisem the fual b'she'at shechaim kam b'kaviyos u'b'chijayfois b'ramat min hagei makom. Okay, so we see now there's now fatar good. Just briefly, so the entire world of the exile, the Rebbe said this work is done, by the way, that all the Birurim are finished. All the sparks have been elevated. Everything's been rectified in a general sense, meaning there's no work left for us to do as Jews in a general sense. But that being said, the Rebbe explains, and it's brought down in Kabbalah, that there's different ways of elevating sparks. Tzaddikim literally go out and search for ways to elevate sparks. In other words, they go out of their way. They have a spark radar, if you will. They're able to know intuitively that there are certain places in the world they need to go to do certain mitzvot, to do certain things. And therefore, they will seek out and go on missions from Hashem to places all over the world in order to elevate the divine sparks that are found there. Then you have the rest of us, the quote unquote normal, well, I don't say normal, the people that are not tzaddikim, not yet, not until Moshiach comes at least, where you go to these different places in the world and you don't even know why you're there. And so it's brought down in the Yom Yom. You may find yourself in the middle of Yedemsveld. You may get a flat tire somewhere, you may go off a wrong exit, and our natural inclination is to say, oh crap, I missed my exit. But if we're aware and we say to ourselves, there's nothing that is accidental, there's no coincidences. So if God sent me on this wrong turn, if God sent me on the wrong airplane, if God's, put me in a layover in some city I wasn't planning on being in, there must be a divine purpose in me being there. And therefore, we'll pick up a drink, we'll say a bracha, we'll drain the lizard, say a blessing after we use the bathroom. We will seek out a Jew to put tefillin on, whatever the case may be. We will realize God sent us here there must be a reason I'm here. Let me do something because there must be some sparks here to me to elevate. In other words, I didn't seek out to do that, but the fact that God put me there means there must be a reason for it. And then, of course, there's the third category where people are not even aware that their sparks are being elevated. God puts people in situations that they're not even aware. They weren't even seeking for them. They weren't even trying to do. You just find yourself, and the next thing you know, something is transpiring, and it was all set up by Hashem in order for sparks to be elevated. And you may not even be aware of it. In other words, you may not even be aware. It could be an interaction with someone. It could be a business deal. You could buy someone. You could run into another chassid and look into each other's eyes. You could pick up find a holy book and learn in it. You don't even know what's going on. Point of the matter is, I believe you, that wherever we find ourselves, it's that elevate sparks. Anyways, okay, so let's continue. Now, according to this, in addition to this, we can see the service according to this way. And even increasing the power and success of our service. Move on to Pashtus, explain in a simple way. Hatam lahabdali manhagim shebein medina lemedina harihu machamas hatochanais amiuchedes shah medina. Lochein kshvenahagim al pi minhag hamakoim. Mata'im yoiser letochanais makom zeh. אבי הדבר הצלחה יסר, ולכן צריך היהודי במצרי במקום זה להנהגי לפי המנהג במדינה, עד שהוא צריך גם לנצל אז המנהג במקום בעבודת השם שלו, The Rebbe says, not only is it that you find yourself in a particular place, and not only that is it that God placed you and literally dispersed the Yidden in different corners of the world, all across the world. The fact of the matter is, you are not only there to elevate the sparks of the place you're in, but even more so, the Rebbe says you will have much more success. You will have additional hatzlacha, additional success wherever you find yourself, because there's a specific reason why you have to be there. And therefore, you have the ability to reach a much higher level in the place where you are, as opposed to where perhaps maybe you thought you would want to be. And from this we can understand, so there's multiple, there's generally two levels, the Rebbe says. Aleph, the first one. The first, and we're talking about the reason why God spread the Yidden across different places in the world in the exile. So the first, the Rebbe says, is to effectuate the innermost dimension of the lowest part of the world, the lower aspects of the world where we find ourselves. Where we can penetrate holiness even into the lowest levels of the world. Low referring to in a spiritual sense. I don't mean not mountainous. According to the boundaries of that place. So therefore, you're able to penetrate the lower aspect in a deep way, in an inner, in a penimius way. And this penetration of holiness into the low place, according to the boundaries, if you will, the limitations of that place. But this is something that's able in such a way that the lower place remains the lower. Rather, only what is happening is it's receiving from a higher level upon it. And afterwards, it's necessary still to do the service even higher. In other words, and again, when we talk about lowness, we don't mean in a mountainous state. We don't mean in how high of an elevation. We're talking about ruchnius, spirituality. So the Rebbe says a Jew finds himself in a place that is a very low spiritual level, and he now sets about to bringing kedusha to that place. So he is able to take a high level of kedusha, namely, the godliness of the Torah, and penetrate it into the lower reality of the world. But the lower reality of that world still stays a lower reality. It is just now infused with godliness. This is the first level. The second level, habiror hazichoch eskan ad kirikach shemakoyim atzmai nisha'ab makoyim shel Torah v'mitzvos. And the second is you're actually refining and purifying this place in and of itself, in a way that now the place is a place of Torah and mitzvahs. And therefore you're building it into a place of Torah. Tefillah Gemot Chasadim, prayer and good deeds. Beit Knesset, Beit Midrash, you're setting up shuls, you're setting up houses of study, houses of good deeds. Beit Knesset, I already said that. And now the place itself is being transformed. Now the advantage of the lower place itself is being revealed because it's being transformed. And to the point you literally see the people in that specific place have transformed. Now they're living a life of Torah and mitzvahs. Now you literally have transformed that place as well as the people that are within it, into a place of Torah and mitzvot. Gimel. The Rebbe said, according to this introduction to these concepts, we can see a tremendous advantage to our generation over previous generations. The Rebbe says, previous generations, we do not see this mass exile, if you will, across the world in such a capacity as we do now. For certain, not in the time the Beis Hamikdash stood, because all the Jews lived in Eretz Yisrael. Rather, this started beginning in this process of spreading out, at the beginning of the exile. And the Jews began living in specific places, in different places. According to the lower half of the globe, if you will. Came with when the Rebbe talks about the lower part of the globe, he's talking about the Western Hemisphere, where the holiness of Torah and Mitzvah did not penetrate, at least not in earlier times. And we see in our generation that Yidden are literally living in the most furthest spread out places in the world, and the lowest part of the world in a spiritual sense. And now, these low places, if you will, are now places that are filled with Torah and mitzvahs. And not only that, the Yidden who are living there are enclosed according to the customs of the place where they are. In other words, they're living a godly existence, but according to the customs of where they are in the specific place. But when we contemplate this, a feel of the regel call, even for a brief moment, we can see how our generation, we are standing at a level that is incomparable from previous generations. Because we see that we have already conquered the world and already rectified and purified all the countries throughout the world. According to what we say above, and therefore, what is happening, the Rebbe says, what it appears to the naked eye is that, Jews are just, they don't want to be in Israel. They want to live to the furthest corner of the world. They don't want to experience new cultures. They want to experience new things. The Rebbe says, on the contrary, what is really happening is God established the footsteps of man, and God has sent Yidden to the furthest corners of the world for the specific purpose of elevating that part of the world, to prepare that part of the world and the whole world for redemption. Look at it like this. I remember when I was in yeshiva, and I was really struggling with this concept of how the Rebbe could be Moshiach. Why is it him? Blah, blah, blah. I was ignorant. Ignorant is not a condescending term. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you're lacking knowledge. And of course, until you learn that knowledge, you can't know it, right? It's so funny, you say something and then someone, right away, zero knowledge on the subject. It's just that to them, it sounds like a foreign concept. Why? Just because you're not aware of something means it can't exist. It's arrogant. It's a huge ego to think just because you don't know something means it just can't be true. Otherwise, you would know everything, right? You know everything in the world. And if you don't know it, then I guess you're just, it can't be existing because you're God. But the reality of it is, when I started learning, I'm not going into that whole subject right now, it's for another time, but when I started really learning and delving deep into the Rebbe's teachings and seeing how, in fact, that God has chosen the Rebbe to be Mashiach, one of the things that really grabbed me and started to click in my brain was, I think at last count, we're at over 7,000 Chabad houses throughout the world. 7,000 Chabad houses throughout the world. And anywhere in the world where you can find a Jew, chances are there's a Chabad house. That didn't exist before the Rebbe. In other words, specifically, that's what the Rebbe is telling us. In previous generations, Mashiach couldn't have come. Why? Because the depth of the godly energy from the Torah hadn't been spread out across the whole world, right? That's what the Baal Shem Tov told Mashiach when he saw him. He said, when are you going to come? And Mashiach said, when your well springs are spread out. In other words, when the innermost dimension of the Torah, the godly energy that is concealed is spread to the entire world. That's when I will come. And that's why the Rebbe is saying, only now, only in our generation is it possible for Mashiach to come. Because in previous generations, the godly energy was in Israel. And then, okay, the diaspora started, it went to Europe, America, but it was still kind of limited. Now you look and it's, wow, everywhere. And look at it like this. Look at it as an electrical grid. The idea is for the light of Mashiach to light up the entire world. Right? We're entering the Hanukkah Festival of Lights. It's a very Mashiach holiday. So now when you see there's Beit Chabad spread out to the entire world, that divine energy now has infused into the culture, into the places across the whole world. So what we're waiting for is just the final seconds for God to say, okay, it's enough. I'm gonna finish the job of flicking the switch. And then all of a sudden it's gonna be like brrr, godly light is just gonna instantly light up the entire world. And you're gonna see it. It's like an electrical grid. All this godly energy that's spread to all these Chabad houses and all these Jewish communities that are set up around the world. It's gonna just lift everything up. That's Mashiach. And that's why the Rebbe is saying, even though it seems like we're in a low generation, it's on the contrary. Only in our generation, only in our times, when this godly energy has spread forth because of the spreading of all the Yidden in the different places of the world, only now is Mashiach really capable of revealing himself. It also said, just another side point, is Mashiach will teach Torah to the entire world. That wasn't possible before. 50 or 100 years ago. How is Mashiach going to teach Torah to the whole world? Now, look at the communication we have. Right now, Mashiach could reveal himself this second, and the entire world in one Zoom hookup or whatever it is, could sit, in wherever they are, literally listen to redemption and listen to Mashiach. And it's all these things are only possible in these times. Okay, let's continue. Dollar. And all these matters apply in both a general and a specific way. As we said above, we've already completed the refining of the world. We see this in a general sense, that the world has been elevated, and we see it specifically in the country of Sarfat, of France. So preface this by saying, it says specifically that the Yidden were sent to the exile, and specifically mentions that they were, Sarfat mentions France as one of the places they got sent into the exile to. Yusha es Arehanahab, according to the ways of the custom of that country. And we see this concept connected to the fact that Hashem will redeem us and return us to Zion, And then he will judge the Mount of Esau, meaning that there are host nations that God literally spread us to the furthest corners of the world. And the question is, how are our host nations treating us? Because however they treated us, that's how they're going to be judged from Hashem. So you can begin to think the fact that the Jews have been thrown out of 129 countries across the world, have been taken, our possessions stolen from us, our houses burned down, I don't want to get into what has happened to us. Well, guess what? As they say in the vernacular of the Eastern religions, karma's a bitch, because all of that judgment is going to come right back on top of them. So any nations of the world who are listening, you better work really hard to appease God and do everything you can to make up for any negative things you did to his chosen people throughout these years. For some people, that's just not possible to the extent of what they've done, but that's another story. It's necessary to understand specifically, it says from the specific one second. There's a specific prophecy talking about the redemption from the gullus of France. We see there's a particular connection to the exile of France, particularly. The Mai Nafkamina is Chara Mufarashas Shahadavra Bapas. A part be Shaoise Bagula. Zamuvan, Jabagula Hushev, Azuchar, Shahai Kishora im Sarfats. The go all how Hazak. Asher the Sarfats. But Yesh Lamara Hatam, Ki Shlemus Bira Oidam, Yisera Hashem Amucha. If all they Habira Oide shall, Sarfat will come in soon. The Rebbe says he's going to speak more about it. That there's something very specific, and it's brought down in a prophecy, that the exile to France was a very particular, difficult exile. That the way of the French, the Enlightenment movement of the French to literally eradicate in a similar way to the Greeks in the time of Hanukkah, meaning to allow the Jewish people to exist, but to immerse them into their culture and to forget about God. So there's a specific connection of the Jews being exiled to France and then being redeemed from France to the actual complete Geula Shlema, as we will learn about shortly. Hey. I think it's a pretty short sikha. Let me see how long we've got. Yeah. Okay. The Varim, Yovana, the Or, HaChidush, VaHashino, Biyach, Shal Yisrael, B'Doreinu Zeh, the Medina Surfat. The Gabi Hayach, Shehel, B'Dor, Shal Admar Hazakim. So we see the Rebbe says, we can understand the unique relationship between the fact that the Jewish people being redeemed from France now, compared to how this took place from the time of the Alter Rebbe. It's known that in this specific period of the Alter Rebbe's leadership, Muhammad ben Napoleon, that when France was at war with Napoleon at its lead, Alexander Harusi was literally a war between the French and the Russians, but Alexander at the head of the Russian army and Napoleon at the head of the French army. Savar Admar Hazaki, the Toiva Mitzvah, Aruch near Shoben Israel, Metnini, Yura, Shemayim, Adif Sherusi, Nitzchach, Sarfat Naha Mufal. It's known at the time of the war between Napoleon and France and Russia, that when the French army was invading Lyozna, Russia, the Alter Rebbe chose, and he wasn't choosing for himself, he was choosing for all the Jewish people, as their Nasi, as the leader, that it was better to support Russia, and that it's better the Jews be exiled in Russia than be in under French rule in France. And the Alter Rebbe's reasoning was the following: it's better that our bodies be imprisoned than our souls be imprisoned. In other words, it's better that we were under the rule of communist Russia, and even though we would be suffering materialistically, we would have very basic needs, and we would be imprisoned, if you will. We would still have our connection to God. On the other hand, if we were under French rule, we would be free to do what we please. Kind of sounds like America, right? They would allow us to go ahead, do whatever you want, but we become so immersed in the dirtiness, the filthiness. I'm talking about spiritual filthiness of the perversion of the sexuality, of the goyish food, of the way of living, that we would be free in our bodies, but our souls would go into such a deep prison that we won't even realize it. The worst prison is the one that you don't even realize you're in. When you're in a physical confinement, you're aware and you know that you have to connect to God because you feel confined. But on the other hand, when you're free to do what you want, it is much more challenging, right? Look at America. America's a perfect example. Look at the level of intermarriage is greater than it's ever been in the history of our people. The amount of Jews that are immersed in the culture of the food, of everything, feel free. It's the contrary. Their souls are in prison. So let's continue. All right, this is what we just basically said. It's better for the Jewish people to be under Russian rule and have our bodies in prison than be under French rule and have our souls in prison. That the Jewish people under French rule would literally be swallowed up into the spirit of French living and literally sacrifice our knowledge and faith in God. And this particular klipa is the kingship of France, if you will, which was called a democracy, but it was worse. As Toikev had klipas b'hadin hakasher. And it's a stronger klipa, it's a stronger shell, a stronger obstacle than being in physical prison. And literally our amuna, our faith and our bitachon and trust in Hashem would be shattered in France because we forget about God. Kind of like what's happening in America. It's easy. Everything is easy. Wonderful. Make yourself a couple bucks. Get yourself a decent car, a decent house. Go to the ball game. You got fast food restaurants in every corner. Chicks is galore. Who needs God? And that's what happened, unfortunately. Rahman al-Islam. כפי שמבואר זוהי שהאדמו"ר האמצעי לא הסרק מני זמני, אלא דבר נגד לכל זמני והדוירה ישלח הזה. כידוע בדברי הימים, המהפכה הצרפה סיס בשנס תשלקריה, תקמ"ס. היסגה מהפכו עד לא נגויס, ideological thinking of the France Enlightenment movement. And that was the prevailing movement at that time. It became enlightened. You don't need God. We've got art. We've got food. We've got philosophy. We have all these psulos, impurities that are wrapped up to make nice, fine delicacies. And that was the prevailing mindset, if you will, of the wall. Ad mahafcha v'hitzur feces ayisam shalas terfas. The surah b'dei melech amalacha. V'hei manhigos v'kol ha'il medrasa. Mahafcha ayisam mufasasas ka'okach. Shebrei adam chayfasim v'nhage keretzoinen. ולכן הדיחה יש המלך המלאכה כדי שלרעס המדינה משלטיתס משלם משלס תראה טבע כדי המדהר. And second, I'm just going to scan through this real quick and then lay it outside. It's the same concept. Explaining. Right. Okay. Again, so it just re-emphasizing this concept that we would have. It was better we stayed in prison in Russia and our minds and our souls remained connected to God than to be quote unquote free in France and our minds and our souls get swallowed up in this enlightenment movement, where we totally lose our faith and belief and trust in God, because now we God forbid wind up getting connected to the enlightenment movements and the way that the world was heading. And according to this, ad kirikach, we see shbagal zeh. Oh, excuse me. Lachamas zu itnaged ad morazakin bakal hatoichav u'mafasarfan. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe, in his nuvuah and his prophecy, he saw exactly what was going to happen. And therefore, as much as he wasn't a big fan of Alexander and the Russian government, he did everything he could to fight against the kingship of France, and in fact, work to help Russia prevail. Ad kirikach shebeglal zayis the sirav the hijois tachash litasam beruach ad mrazakin im kol b'nei b'yisrael me'ilidi ad mrazakin abetiach. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe chose to put his power behind the Russian government, and that they should be victorious in the war against France. And there's a lot of forebringing we could do on this point, but it's not the time or the place for it. About the importance of the Alter Rebbe's decision and the realization of how it's a much worse prison to be imprisoned Baruch Niyasta Bagashmes. To be in a spiritual prison and feel that you're free to do what you want is a worse prison than to be locked up and feel your connection to Hashem the whole time. The Alter Rebbe saw how undesirable things would be for the Jewish people under French rule. Even as bad as Russian rule was, he realized that it would be worse under the French. Because even though the Jewish people would suffer under a communist French rule, they still nevertheless would be able to continue in their service and drawing close to their Father in heaven. And specifically, we see through the revealing of the spreading out of Chassidus. And literally, this is where it began the process in Russia of the Alter Rebbe spreading out the teachings of Chassidus, which of course we celebrated in the last 2 days in the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, Yud Tes V'Chaf Kislev. And that specifically was able to take place in a place like Russia, where it was under communist rule, but the Yidden souls were still available. Vav. Excuse me. According to this, we can see the unique addition to all we said above in our generation specifically. and surfas, and specifically also in the connection to France. Specifically, we see even now in France how many shluchim of the Rebbe are now in a place that at once was so detrimental for the Jews to go. We see a place where the klipa was so strong, where the opposition of godliness was so strong that the Alter Rebbe chose better to stay under communist Russian rule than to go to France. And now France is booming with Yiddishkeit and Chassidischkeit and countless Chabad houses and countless shluchim over there, just to show the extent of the well springs that have been spread out from the Rebbe. That the well springs of Hasidus have not only spread out to the furthest corners of the world, they have really gone to the depths of France. And again, France is a focal place because it was so low spiritually that the Alter Rebbe literally did not want the Jewish people to go there, even though they would have been free physically to live how they wanted. And now that very place that was such an opposition to godliness is infused with godliness and the teachings of Chassidus. And we see how, and recently, that the teachings of Chassidus have spread out literally from one end of the world to the other. Asher lo yirak or hakadusha hagia ba'ir gam sham ela shehudim lomdi atorah. Mikiyama mitzvahs b'rias shemayim shvagam lemshech zeman. Not only are Yidden there, but they're learning Torah, they're doing mitzvot. The teachings of Chassidus have been spread out. Specifically from the shluchim of the Rebbe, the leader of the generation. And not only that they're living, we already said they're keeping Torah and mitzvahs in the highest way. שגם יהודים נוספים יכולים לבורהם ויצא מכך שהתפיסו אצל האחר מכאן כזה בזה במיוחד האחר מחמס העולם השני. The Rebbe says we see this really even at a higher level after the Second World War. הגיעו לשם בהשגחה פרטיס, where we see the divine ordinance, and specifically in the dwelling of Jewish people throughout many different countries across the world. This really has moved into full gear, if you will, after the Second War, which specifically is connected to the Nasias of our Rebbe. Shluchim had been sent out before from the Frierdiker Rebbe, even from the Rebbe Rashab, but they were few. It wasn't like it is now by any stretch of the imagination. To the point that this country, France, has literally been transformed into a merkaz, a central place of Torah and mitzvahs. Torah in general and Chassidus in particular. We even see that there's a Tamchei Tamimim, a Lubavitch Yeshiva there. And many Tamimim have come out from there. And many branches have spread out from there. Including Jewish education, and more and more holy things have come forth from there. Shem Sfarim, And then we see more and more light have been spread out to such a place that at once was in a state of such spiritual darkness. And according to this, we can see something very unique that has transpired and taken place. And this is connected to the general service of the yin and the world. And throughout the generations, the Jewish people have literally spread farther and further into more unique places in the world that they never were in such a place. כדי לפועל שם בירור מתבקש שהרי שלמוס הבירור שלו בשעה שמשיליסם במקום ההוא הילך ונימוסי. And we see therefore the completion of the elevating of the sparks that just wasn't possible in previous generations because there were no Jews in these places where the sparks had fallen to. And of course, the fact that these sparks have spread out to these far-off places, that brings a unique advantage to the Jews who are in these places and the specific work that they're conducting in these places. Specifically with the spreading out of the well springs from our Rebbes, throughout the continuation of the Nesias of a Rebbeim, more and more from generation to generation, up into our generation. The Rebbe says to our generation where we see that even France has been rectified. And again, you say, okay, who cares about France? But we learn out the fact that, again, that the Alter Rebbe was so against the Jewish people being under French rule that he preferred them to be under communist Russian rule because it was in such a spiritual dark place. And the Rebbe says now even France, which is considered in many places to be the lowest spiritual place in the world. I don't know if you've ever spent any time in France. I have. I don't know if that's something to be proud of or not. But I was vacation and went through there and spent a long time there before I became observant. And it's a lot of klipa. How can I tell you? There's something in the culture of just open sexuality and sensuality, and it's just such a concealment of God. And the Rebbe says even France has now been rectified. The lowest of the lowest places, the Rebbe says. Again, we're talking spiritual. And now we see not only have countless Jews lived and moved to France, and countless shluchim and countless Torah institutions, but we see it has now been rectified and purified. Especially the fact that we see that the well springs of Chassidus have now permeated into France. The Coneheads are from France? I'm not sure. Bringing back, so that's some old school stuff. Most people probably have no idea what a Conehead is. I'm sure we do. Okay, Zion. יש לומר שהכוח לזה נויבה מכך. שזה היה סדר אצל נשיא דורנו עצמו כבקודש ועד. המקוים הקבוע של רבותינו נשיאים. עד כבקודש ומברכה עד more, we see that multiple Rebbes have also spent time in France. You know that the Frierdiker Rebbe sent the Rebbe to live in France. Also we see also in Russia. אפילו כאשר יצא מהמדינה ההיא מקום תחילה האדמו"ר המרש. The Rebbe HaMarash. זה רק באופן ארי, על מנת לחזור. The Rebbe Marash spent time in France as well. And we see the Frierdiker Rebbe has an advantage over even the previous Rebbes. His main place of residence was, in fact, Russia. But nevertheless, he dwelled in other places. The Rebbe says we see three distinct periods of the Frierdiker Rebbe based on his Nesias, on his leadership, and based on where he was physically. In other words, where he brought Lubavitch to and where the light of Lubavitch was spread at different periods. We see the first period, 7, which literally was around 10 years. The Tukfa Harishain, which is Tafresh Pei to Tafresh Pei Ches. The Ikar Arusi mainly was in Russia. The Tukfa Hasheni, and the second period of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Tafresh Pei Ches to Tafshin, was in Poland, Chipolny. Kafuch Hashlishis, and the third period of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nesias, in America, and of course the continuation of our Rebbe in that. But according to what we said above, the Rebbe says we see the fact again. He's now emphasizing that in every single place there's an advantage, and there's a reason why God sends Jews to that specific place, because there's godly energy that needs to be elevated from that place. And we see specifically how the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Nesias literally had 3 different missions in 3 places in the world. Excuse me. To elevate the godly sparks there. Russia to Poland to America. And that, of course, brought forth in the spreading out of Chassidus to all those places. And therefore he enclosed his divine service in those specific places, wherever he was. In other words, a Rebbe isn't in let's say, Russia, and knows with Nevuah that in a few years he's going to be in Poland. And it's like, all right, let's just chill out here. We've got a few more years, No, if you look in the times when the Jews were traveling in the deserts, it's a very important lesson that wherever we were, even if it was for one night, we had to set up the whole kit and caboodle, the whole Mishkan. It was a lot of work. We're not just talking about some pop-up tents. We're talking about the Jews would have to literally go in, camp out, spend God knows how many hours, probably most of the night, setting up their whole camp, setting up the Mishkan, getting everything all set up, and then the next day Moshe says, okay, let's go next place. They could have, listen, why don't you drink us a cup? We know we're all going to be here for a couple of nights. Let's not set everything up. No. Wherever you find yourself, you can't just look at it as a transition to the next place. You can't just say, all right, well, I'm only here for a brief amount of time. Guess what? We're only in this world for a brief amount of time. So wherever we are, we have to dig ourselves into that place and to bring that godly energy into that place to the maximum of our abilities, even if we know we're only there for a short period of time. And that's exactly what we see from the example of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And we see this from the service of all of our Rebbes. That it's up into the time that Lubavitch literally traveled across the world and wound up here in America. Which is in the lower half of the globe. Again, the Western Hemisphere, the Rebbe often refers to as the lower half of the globe, meaning the most physical and the least spiritual, if you will, least godly. And literally see through our Rebbes that we have the power to elevate the lowest spiritual places in the world, no matter where they may be. And we see that specifically the fact that France itself has also been elevated. And this is a unique thing we see in our generation regarding previous generations, even including the times of the Alter Rebbe. And this is a direct relation we see specifically again to France. The after we see the great lengths of the well springs of Chassidus that have been spread out from the times of the Alter Rebbe up into our times, including the service of the Yidden throughout the furthest corners of the world to rectify and purify whatever area we may find ourselves in. And furthermore and mainly, the that all of these things are bringing closer the true redemption and the completion of the rectification of the entire world, which is our generation. The Kabbalah, and we see this additional power that has been brought forth from our generation, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, even more. The Paul is that to bring about the ability to rectify such a place like France. Because in the times of the Alter Rebbe, it wasn't possible. If it was possible to rectify France, the Alter Rebbe would have said, let's go to France. This place is ready to get rectified. No. It's almost like the Lubavitch had to spread out to the whole world until it got to the bottom, the Kishkas, France, America, the places that are literally the furthest away from Hashem. And we see that the Rebbe Marash spent many times that he traveled to France and made many Bali Chuvas over there. We also see that the Rebbe Rashab spent time in France in many times. It's going through all the different rectifications, right? The Alter Rebbe, it's up. This place isn't ready to be elevated. So what happened is over time, as the place of France became more and more a kli for godliness, and we see that through the journeys of the Rebbe. Hold on, I lost my place. The Rebbe Marash, and then we see with the Rebbe Rashab. Shem went also many times. Va'ad Shem binyan shel meshech atashri reish beis. Haidur shekam gam kasiv chelek v'chama ahemshech. He wrote many of his teachings there. And it reached its ultimate state of rectification, where the depths, the innermost dimension of it, already had godliness in it. In our generation specifically, we see it's reached its final rectification. In addition to the many times of going to France, talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe now, and gave over many words of Maimarim and the Tzichos of Chassidus. Shalach l'shem shluchim b'merabe. So I sent many shluchim there. Asher chayiv shem kama shenim. And we know, of course, that also the Frierdiker Rebbe sent the Rebbe specifically to live in France, to get the final nitzutzot out of there. Okay, just talking about many of his activities there, skipping the brackets. Many Hasidic discourses were given there. Much Torah was spread out there. Makladus in general. Excuse me. But Allah Sham, Bibra of Zachak Bedoror, Bederach Yidlavshus Ayide, Behelach Min Musik. Excuse me. We see that specifically through the increase of Torah knowledge in France, which brings forth an increase in fear of God and awe of God. That the godly energy now has entered into the innermost depths of this place of Klippa. That literally the original Klippa of France was so powerful, and because of our Rebbes and because of the work that they've done in setting people there in Shluchim, it was able to penetrate and literally pull out all that negative energy and transform it to godly energy. And the Rebbe said everything reached its culmination and completion when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America. The Chetzi Kador HaTachton, to the lower half of the globe. Yisad Sham Yeshivas Tamchei Tamim, where he established there in France, Yeshivas Tamchei Tamim. And many other Beit Chabad, many other organizations. And he said many shluchim there, the Chafritz Torah to spread out the teachings of Torah, specifically the teachings of Chassidut. ההצלחה הגדולה מרובה בכוח העולם פועלויס של הצפת התורה היוחדת מן החרס חוצה המדינה צרפת. ועוד מדינויס באופן ההולך ומסך האור. And this of course brought forth more light and more holiness. עד האופן שנויסף לזה שנעשי דרנו נויסן כוח להמשיך קדושה. That is specifically through the power of the leader of the generation to draw holiness into such a place. Kedusha gama tachtoin, into the lowest of places. It comes from his power. Makoim hu gufo asa ois makoim umakor shel Torah, to transform such a place of klipa into literally a place of Torah. Yeshivas Tamkei Tamimim Sham, including also the founding of Tamkei Tamimim there. Kama Lubavitch, and many branches of Lubavitch. The Defisim Sham, Divrei Torah, in addition to spreading out the teachings of Torah there, but Torah Hanigla Torah Hasidus, to reveal Torah and the inner aspect of the Torah, Klo Chidush Torah, including unique things in the Torah. And this is emphasized again specifically in such a place like France. Nasim Makor, the Aini Torah Makor Ilim Kulo. Shagam Akri, Mekabli, Minina Torah, Difisim Sham. Kulam the Moy, Maho, Isa Machbius, Kamar. Okay, so according to what we said above, Hatzlichais, Shah Pualis, Pualis Sham Aksha. The success of these activities we see even up to this day. Hein Hagilui Bafwal Shah Koichais, Asher Koikadoshim Maria Admor Nasi Derenu, Shakia Gam Shnaim Shunfneze. Up until we see the leadership of the Frierdiker Rebbe, especially in his two latter parts of his Nasias. We know that the leader of the generation is connected to the whole generation. It says the pasuk of Nasi hu Akal, that the leader is everything. Because it is through his power that diffuses to all the people of the generation, and gives them the power to rectify and purify the world, even the lowest part of the world. Even into this place that is really so low. So low. Okay. Ches. There's to say. Rumas Gam Yeshem Tzarfat. We see this hinted also in the name of France. Tzarfat hi Meloshen Tziruf. That Tzarfat is the same root of Tziruf, which literally is a derivative of Tziruf, is a purifying. It's making pure, which is connected to rectifying and purifying such a place. We see this as it's connected to the redemption. Lost my place. Oh, it's for rule. The rule is Rabbi. Shahagula haya harihu. Bo ayilei shleimus would be rahat three kushakodim, and we see that the redemption is expressed. We see through the complete refinement and rectification and purification of the whole world, which the Rebbe said we're already holding. In addition to this, the Rebbe said Tzarfat or France is the same gematria of 770. Shleimos mispar sheva, which is the completion of the number 7. Kafisha kol echad kulo me'eser. We have 7, and we know that in each, referring, of course, to the 7 emotional attributes. of the nations of the world, which are rectified. They're talking about Esau in the time of the exile. Also referring to the 7 laws of Noah, which are the rectification of those as well. So in each one, there's 10 sfirot, which is 70. And the completion is, in those, there's another 10. So you have 770, or 770, which is the completion of the number 7 in tens and in hundreds. And this is hinted on, the completion of the rectification of France. Yeser al kach 770 zehu mibeit shel kamei kadosh maranasi derenu, and of course we know that 770 is the address of the leader, the address of the leader of the generation. Asher bo chaya be'ever avodasa be'esra shanim acharonim shel chayim hayisa ba'amadin, and this is where he spent the latter third period of his Nesias up until our point in time, where the Rebbe, of course, considers his Nesias, his leadership, as a continuation of his father-in-law's. And we see in this latter period specifically the work of the completion of the rectification and cleansing of the lower half of the world. And this is where we see that the well springs of the leader of the generation from 770, the teaching spread out to the entire world. In addition to this, as the Gal says במקום זה באופן שמורגש מקום נעשה קבוע בכל ענייני התורה ומצוות. This is a permanent place, talking about 770, of spreading out Torah and mitzvahs to the furthest corner of the world. Okay, based on what there's to say. Shu Baha Tili. Today, the Pual S. Biroy HaToiche Atachtin B'Yosef. So Kukim the Koach HaEtz. B'tzad B'chinas HaGilui. Shabo Yesh Chiluk Ben Elyon V'Tachtin. Cholim the Hemshech Alus. And of course, we see that when there's this process of rectifying or refining a place, you have two things. You have the upper world and the lower. And the idea is to bring the upper energy into and infuse the lower. To literally transform the lower parts and make it a proper vessel for receiving the godly energy from above. But this is not the case when you're dealing with the essence of the thing, which the Rebbe emphasizes this concept many times in these teachings. After the Vorah the Tzuraf, a feel of Mamakoy Matakton She'eno Kli. Va'ad Yisirum Ezel Hamshich Gam Hetza Atzmi. Achen Gam the Eder Dafka Va'amsois Mamakoy Machir Tachton Mitzgal Hetzim Asher Poaos Abira Bakohavim. That it's specifically to this latter level that we spoke about earlier, where you transcend this thing where, okay, you have the lower part of the world and the higher part of the world, or the spiritual and the physical, or the holy and the mundane. And the holy comes into the mundane and is able to enter into the mundane and start making the mundane become holy. But you still have the upper separation between holy and mundane. The idea is that the holiness infuses so deep into the mundane that the mundane literally transforms itself and the whole thing becomes one godly energy. It's the same thing with the body of a Yid that the Rebbe speaks about many, many times in these teachings. That it's the whole point of redemption is that we shouldn't have world, God, spiritual, physical. Everything becomes atzmus. The whole entire world reveals the very essence of God and the oneness of God. Test. And according to this, we can understand how that we have the completion, rectification, and purification of the entire world and the gods. and they were literally ready to go to the Har in Tzion, the mountain in Tzion, for God to judge Esav, to judge the host nations of the Yidden for how they treated us during our period while we were here rectifying the world. And then God will rule over the entire world in a revealed way. And we see this how, again, through the enclothing of godliness into such a low place like France, and how it has totally been elevated. The exact same thing that is taking place in the entire world and will be revealed when Moshiach comes. And we see two matters. The elevating of the lowest part of the world even more, which has brought about the completion and the rectification of the entire world. And we see this hinted in the name of Sarfat, which is French, which again comes from the root of Siruf, which literally means to rectify or to purify. Base, the original Sarfat, and the rectification of France, which is Gematria 770. Rumaz Gam Begiluya Etzem is revealing of this higher level, which is the essence of the place. And therefore, through the power to rectify all the matters in a complete way, so we don't have any separation anymore, and literally just transform to a godly place. Good. Okay, we're almost done. It's a couple more letters. And according to this, we can see even more how a Yid, and we can see the activities and bringing about and revealing, literally, so we can see with our physical eye, the rectification and the transformation of Sarfat, of France. There's a lot of emphasis in the Sikha on France. And again, because it's giving a clear hora, it's giving a clear teaching how we can have a place that the Alter Rebbe, literally, the leader of the generation, the complete highest level of a tzaddik that you can imagine, much more a Rebbe, was not ready, not him, but the world was not ready to have a rectification of such a low place like France. And now it has been completely transformed. The Rebbe is letting us know that the entire world has been transformed, that no matter how dark it may appear to be, and it's not true, that everything literally now is a complete vessel for the redemption. Yedua for some, Medina Yesh Nigun Miuchad. So the Rebbe is giving us an example how we can see clearly that France has been rectified. And how is that? Because France had a very particular nigun that was their national anthem. It was that was the French national anthem. So Oisai Shurim Az Managini Risifa as Moera Rishimo. But Ta'am Medina. אז כאשר תושבי המדינה נאספים יחדיו במאוריס רשמיים מסוימים, אבל דרך זה כאשר בכוח ונציגים של מדינה מנויסים למדינה אחרת כתוב זה, מובן שניגון המדינה נציגה בדוגמה של המדינה. We know that the national anthem of a place is it reflects that place, right? Like you sing a national American national anthem. Like this is America. This is where America is like, wow, this song represents America. So every country has a song that represents that country. I'm just going to read through this inside real quick and then translate it outside for brevity. Just because I'm getting very, very tired. So basically what happened Let me just read this part about inside. V'siva zadavar misvarim kani zakni hachasini she'achri hanigon hafech lekadusha הרגש זו אשר מזלה למעלה של מדינה צרפת, וזה גם למטה אצל שירים בניק, בצד הדגשה, שנינים נעשה שייך לחייס וקדושה, ניגון חסיד האשר, Okay, I'm not going to just read through that, just I'm going to translate it briefly outside. So what happened was, it was the Rebbe, Chassidim, the Rebbe, it's not really much of a difference in these matters. And during our Farbrengen one time, there was the French national anthem. At that moment, the Rebbe basically let everyone know that France has been conquered, that there's no more holy sparks in France that needed to be elevated, and that France itself has been transformed completely. And in acknowledgement of such a thing, what the Rebbe did is he took one of the parts of the davening, Deras Hamuna, and he took, well, the Hasidim actually, I think, started, it's a question, the Rebbe started, the Hasidim started, but they took the French national anthem and they started singing a nigun, a Hasidic nigun, based on this specific part of the davening, in the Shabbos davening, to the tune of the French national anthem. That's why you go to 770, and almost every Shabbos, different shuls use different tunes, but in 770, almost completely, very rare have I been there, they didn't sing this nigun during this part of the davening. And they literally took the French national anthem and turned it into a Hasidic nigun. And the Rebbe explains that every country has a ministering angel. It's known that when Yaakov wrestled with Esav in last week's parsha, he didn't wrestle with Esav. He wrestled with Esav's ministering angel. I don't want to go too far into this because it's a whole different Farbrengen, but every country has a ministering angel. There's 70 countries according to the Torah, and each one of those countries has a ministering angel above. That's why it says the best place in the world to learn Torah is in Eretz Yisrael. It's the best place to live because you're in Eretz Yisrael. God channels his energy from heaven directly into Israel. In other words, you have an Israel Lamata, Israel Lamaila. There's a direct channel from above to below in Eretz Yisrael. You have Jerusalem, the base of Midrash. The whole thing is in one big pipe between Gashmis and Ruchnis. So when God brings his energy into the world, it goes directly into Eretz Yisrael. Everywhere else in the world, that energy first goes into the 70 ministering angels. And from the 70 ministering angels, it then goes into the specific country that they're in charge of ministering over. So when the Rebbe transformed France completely and changed their nigun, their national anthem into a Hasidic nigun, it literally caused above the falling of that ministering angel, the conquering of that ministering angel, just like Yaakov conquered Esav's ministering angel. And as a result, that ministering angel no longer had power to bring negativity to France. So much so that in a very short period after the Rebbe started singing this nigun, all of a sudden France, what are the chances that the French government were in 770 and heard the Rebbe change the nigun? That's not what happened. What happened is because the ministering angel fell, that energy no longer could go in a klipa way. And in a very short period of time, France changed their national anthem. It's like out of nowhere, they just decided we need a new national anthem because the Rebbe literally sucked all the Kedusha out of there and literally transformed it. And that's why the French national anthem got changed into a Hasidic nigun. Yudov. So what's the skinny? What's going on now? The Rebbe says, what is a Yid supposed to do now? A Yid says, listen, I don't have time to do anything else. Okay, I'm learning Torah. I'm too busy. I don't have time for anything else. Kol gam mesoifim ad shehem eno toifis etzem makam gokach. Reshis tzarich aliyos achra v'hoda l'Hashem al hanisim shuasei. The Rebbe says, first of all, it's necessary literally to announce and to praise and thank Hashem for all the miracles He's done for us. Especially as we're reaching the days of Hanukkah. And we know Hanukkah is a time of Purusomi Nisa, that we must advertise. We must what is literally to advertise, to spread out miracles. Mamila afilo im timtzi loima sheba'asher yemei hashana lo tzrich aliyos. Kazeh hargasha beinesha aprusim nisa. Hari miyemei Hanukkah tzrich alihazbar v'nisinga. That in Hanukkah it's necessary. It's an obligation to talk about miracles and to spread out miracles. There is to say shezeh klal. We're not only talking about the miracle of the Jews over the Greeks and the miracle of the oil, but rather all the miracles, that Hashem has done for all the Yidden, up until this point in time. In other words, we're not supposed to just talk about the miracles of the Maccabees versus the Greeks. But we need to talk about the miracles that God has done for all the Jewish people up until this time we're living right now. And namely and mainly. That we all have to have great thanks and appreciation to Hashem. That furthermore, for the fact that we are literally on the threshold of the true and complete redemption. The Rebbe has a very famous sikha from Memehei, if I'm not mistaken, in 1985, where the Rebbe says that we must be besimcha, that we have to be besimcha, we have to be happy for no other reason than just to be happy. In other words, don't wait for God to sprinkle, little tchotchkes and prizes and candies on you. That when God does things good for you, now I can be happy. Well, thank you, Hashem. Hook the brother up. No, we have to be happy to Hashem all the time. We have to be thankful to Hashem all the time. For the fact of, we have to be happy just because, to be happy for no other reason. How much more so the Rebbe says in that sikha, by the way, that this is the only reason he could think of that why we're still in the exile, because the Yidden aren't happy. And he says, for the sheer fact that Mashiach is about to come, this alone should cause us to be overwhelmed with joy, regardless of anything else that's going on in our life. Kafish, Hagmara, Omeres. And we have already completed, as we said, all the things that are incumbent upon us. And now we must request for Hashem to bring Mashiach. Amra midas yedin lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Azechia shenasa li kol hanisim hallelu. V'lo amar shira lefnecha b'ter Mashiach. And these are the songs of praise that we sing during Hanukkah. And of course that we're going to sing even in a higher level when Mashiach comes. And according to this we have to understand. Nisa that we must advertise the miracles that Hashem are doing for us right now in this time and place. And this is connected to the actual bringing of the true and complete redemption immediately. I just have to tell you, and I don't want to go into any negativity, but I can promise you, I can assure you that if it wasn't for Hashem protecting and looking over us right now, there would be another Holocaust. Because the state of the world is in such a low place, and we all know this is how things work, right? When the money gets funny, blame the Jews. When things get bad, blame the Jews. We're an easy scapegoat. So right now, it's brought down that when Mashiach comes, the nations of the world will be warring one another. The left with the right, this with that one, and the Jews will sit back and watch. it's a complete miracle from Hashem that not only are we living, but we're prospering during these times right now. Because God forbid, a million times, it could be a much, much worse situation for all of us. This alone is a reason to thank and praise Hashem. Yud Beis. And the main thing is we must take these teachings upon ourselves and receive these teachings. The Rebbe says the fact of the matter is that the true and complete redemption is still not here in a complete way, at least. First of all, we must spread out and talk to others about miracles that God is doing for us. Miracles for us and miracles for others. In every single place. And the miracles that Hashem are doing for us right now. And like it's known, this itself is a pathway to redemption when we acknowledge and recognize all the goodness and miracles that God does for us. How much more so during the days of Hanukkah. As we said above, it's a time for literally spreading out and talking to people about miracles. And the Rebbe said we have to have more and more Hasidic Farbrengens throughout the days of Hanukkah, specifically on the days of Hanukkah. The Ravah Sham Torah, where we must spread and teach words of Torah. Torah Panimis Torah, the revealed Torah and the innermost aspect of the Torah. The Kabbalah Halaktas Taivas of Torah mitzvahs, and accept upon ourselves good resolution to increase in our Torah and mitzvahs. In addition to spreading out more light. And mainly the Var Be'eni Parasumi Nisa and Nisim B'Yamei Mahim Bizman Hazeh. And more specifically, the Rebbe says during these Farbrengens we must advertise and talk about the miracles that are taking place right now in these times. Yud Gimel. And the Rebbe says this is also connected, of course, to France, where literally more and more Farbrengens are being done over there. And we find ourselves literally amongst many Frenchies at the time that are in 770. Masudas, Hadashim, Tzarfat, Hadavasam, Sifrim, Hadashim. Must print more holy books and send them over there. And this will also increase the rectification of the whole world. We must increase, the Rebbe says, in our Torah and mitzvot. And specifically, the Rebbe says the mitzvah of tzedakah. The kravas as a gula. We know that tzedakah brings close to redemption. A gula shall yisro b'kol edim kulam. This will bring redemption to the entire world and to the Yidden specifically. And therefore, we shall lift up our cups and say l'chaim. Canada. And the Rebbe is literally saying l'chaim. I'm pretty sure that during this Farbrengen, during this talk, there was a lot of French. I think it was a French shluchim, and a lot of Frenchies were there. The Rebbe emphasized literally was speaking to them. But now he's saying we have to lift up our cups and say the Chaim to the Yidden across all places in the world, in America, in Canada, in France. Yudal, Behiratzon, maybe Hashem's will. Should be roar, Bahafchim, Shel Tzarfat. That through the rectification and transformation of France. Together with the completion of the work of the rectification of the entire world. Before Mamish. It should happen immediately. As Kiyom Hayud Vegulas Hachal Azel the Bnei Israel, that all the Jewish people should be redeemed. Ad Safat, including everyone in France. Yerusha es Are Hanik. We should all travel to the Tzion. Yishpad es Ar Esav, where God will judge Esau, and God will be the true one king over the whole world. And this will be in the Gula Mitzvah Shalem, and the true and complete redemption through Moshiach, our righteous Redeemer. Faratzta elecha faratz, and will spread out to the entire world. Zeh Moshiach shenamar. This is talking about Moshiach. Allah faratz lefinehem, which is one of his name is parrots. He will spread out. My holy brothers and sisters, if they're listening, Hashem should bless us all. That Hashem should reveal miracles upon each one of us, even before we get to Hanukkah. Allah has come when we get to Hanukkah, the times of miracles. We should have the ultimate miracle with a true and complete redemption. Take it from Yad Mamish. Have a Hanukkah, a happy Hanukkah with lights, and the essence, the true light of the innermost aspect of the Torah should spread forth to you in a personal way, in a general way. And B'tzrat Hashem, long before next Monday night's year, during Hanukkah, we should be in the base of Mila Shlishi. Ken Hiratzain. Moshiach now.